this is what we're aiming for. For those of you that are interested in knowing, what are we going to be doing? So the models that you made, the conceptual masses, you notice how I have them here on this project. I will show you how to bring them in, but for now, they won't be there. Our goal tonight is going to be to simply get this site in place, get the street and the sidewalk, and then the parkway. We are not going to show any thickness yet to that curb. I'm going to hold off on that. We're going to keep everything relatively flat, as you can see from this example here. So then let me go ahead and get started. So I'm going back home. For those of you that are using the web-based version, this is how we're going to do things. For those of you that have a desktop version right now, you simply start with a new project and it will be the architectural units. I will go ahead and create new. I'm going to click on the down arrow here and select architectural feet and inches. And what I'd like to do now is go ahead and remember to save this. I'm going to click on Untitled, and I'd like to save it to my SketchUp folder. And it's going to be first initial, last name, 3D site. And I'll go ahead and click Save here. I am indicating that we're going to begin this project. This is going to be the origin right there. And you'll also see that I indicated 40 feet along the green axis and 125 along the red axis, meaning this, that if I draw a line here just to help me out, this is going to be the red axis, and this will be the green axis. So from here, what I'd like to do, and again, reminder to myself, right? 125 along the red axis. And I'm going to orbit like this, because that's basically what it's going to look like. And I'll zoom it out a little bit. This person here, I don't need it anymore. So I'm simply clicking on it and I will hit the delete key. Now there's a couple of ways of doing this site, this corner lot. It's 40 feet by 125. It's basically a rectangle. I can come back to SketchUp and I can draw a rectangle. And yes, I want to simply do the rectangle there. And if I hover right here, you'll notice how it snaps to that origin. This is where the red, the green, and the blue axis meet. And I know that that's the origin and it's snapping to it. So I can click on it one time and then I can move my cursor. Now I have to make sure that my rectangle is blue. That way I know that it's laying flat and it is perpendicular to the blue axis. And as I continue to move my cursor, you notice as I keep stretching it along my red axis here, you see that valley continues to increase. And if I move it along the green axis, you'll see down in dimensions that that value also increases. But it looks like I should enter my red axis value first and then the green. So I can type in 125 feet, comma, 40 feet, and enter. And that is the site. That's the size of it. I'm now going to zoom out. I'm going to orbit, and then I'm going to pan. And then I am done drawing, so I can use my space bar to bring back my select tool. Remember, I told you, let me just bring this over for a second. I'm going to be referencing, sorry, let me just float this here. I'm going to be referencing my shortcuts throughout this tutorial. That's one way to draw it. Let me undo this and I'll show you another way of doing it. I can simply draw lines. So I'll click on line and I'll start at that origin point. I'll make sure that it snaps to that origin and it shows me origin. So I click one time. And now I take it and I follow the red axis. And if you're not sure if it's following the red axis, right arrow. There we go. So now I know I've locked in. So now it's showing me a length, and I don't need to click in that box. All I have to do right now is simply type in 125 feet and enter. And it has drawn a line that is 125 feet in length. And now if I take my cursor over, you notice that I can continue to draw. And I'd like to now make sure that I'm constraining to the green axis. So which arrow key should I use? Left. Now I know I'm for sure locking into it. In this direction, it's going to be 40 feet. So I have typed in 40 and then the apostrophe and then enter. Now I'd like to bring it back. Tap the right arrow key to constrain to the red axis. And I'll type in 125 feet, 125 feet, and enter. And then I'm going to come back, and there's no need for me to constrain because I want to make sure that it snaps to this endpoint. So I'm going to click on the endpoint. And there we go. We now have a surface. Either way, you can use a rectangle, type in the overall length and width, or you can draw 4 lines and provide the length and width that way. The next thing I'd like to do, go back to my selection tool, to my select tool rather, I'm going to use my space bar. And now you'll notice that if I hover in here, nothing happens. But I would like to make a group out of this. Triple click it. Right click it, make group, exactly. So we locked in and we made a group out of this. It's a little difficult to see, to make out the difference. I mean, I can orbit and I'll see that the shading changes just a little bit, but I want to be able to distinguish this a little different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my tools on the right-hand side, hover, hover, hover on this one that says materials. And I'm going to click on it. When I click on materials, it shows me materials here. By the way, I had opened up styles before, so let me close that. Same with display and same with this one. There we go, just the materials. It's currently showing me the materials that are in my model. And these the colors here are coming from that figure that was part of the template. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to click on the browse icon. And now that shows me a category of materials. From this category, I would like to click on landscaping, fencing, and vegetation. And when I do that, it opens up some swatches. And now I'm going to scroll down so you can see all the different swatches. And I'm going to focus on this one right here. You'll notice this is the first example of grass that we see on the list. I'm going to click on it. When I click on it, I come up here and it tells me that it is grass, dark green. That is the current material. And now when I come back into my model, what has my icon turned into? It's a paint bucket. And all I have to do now is simply click on my group one time, and it applies that grass material to that group. I can see it much better. Now I'll tap my space bar to get back to my select tool. And I will close my materials. In fact, I'll just collapse it over here. I'll close the panel. If you're not sure whether or not you made the lot the correct size, don't forget, you can come over here to your tools, hover over this icon where it says text in my case, but for the most part, yours will say tape measure. Go ahead and click on that tape measure. And you just start at the origin. You click one time on the origin. And then you bring it over. No clicking, just bring it over. Let it snap to that endpoint, but don't click. And it says 125 feet. And I'll bring it over to the other endpoint. Hover to it, let it snap, but don't click. And it says 40 feet. and we're good. And all I want to do now is go back to my select tool. So I used my space bar to get back to select. So let's proceed. Let's continue. I'll go back to my example. And we've already started that. We started at the origin. So I've already gone ahead and placed my property in there. And eventually we're going to be placing a residential project on this site, but not yet. The next thing I'd like to do is begin placing my sidewalks. So I'm going to start, let me just use my draw tools here for a second. And what I'd like to do is just draw this sidewalk, this portion of it right here, from here to there, and then over this way, and then that part. That's my next goal. 6 feet by 40. It's important that we know these dimensions so that now when I go back to my model here, I'm going to orbit and then pan and try to get that area on my screen. And now I can either use my line tool and I can draw lines, and I can start a line here, take it over to this endpoint because I know it's exactly 40 feet, click, bring it over, make sure it's constrained to red, tap the right arrow key. That is 6 feet. I type in 6 feet, enter. I bring it back, make sure it's constrained to the green axis. So I use my left arrow key. It's constrained and I type in 40 feet. And then I come back and then I just click on the endpoint to close it off. That's one way to draw it. I'll tap my space bar. That's one way. The other way, I'll undo this. All the lines are now gone. I can draw a rectangle. And when I draw a rectangle, I start here. And I now take it all the way over there. That's about the general location where I would like my sidewalk to end. And if I look at the dimensions down at the bottom, you'll notice that it's giving me the width first and then the length. So I know that my width is 6 feet. So I type in 6 feet, comma, and then I type in 40 feet and enter. So that was the other way. So those are the two different ways to get this drawn. And then I'll tap my space bar because I've completed that process. I'd like to continue now. And the next sidewalk or part of the sidewalk that I'd like to draw is this one here. Let me highlight this for all of you. I want to complete this sidewalk. And that sidewalk is 6 feet by 125. And by the way, let me go back here. I have not made a group out of this yet. And the reason for that is because I need to connect all of these individual sidewalks at some point. I will, once I've connected them, then I will make my group. I'd like to put in the sidewalk here, 6 feet by 125. So I select my rectangle. And what's my keyboard shortcut? R. So I'm going to type in R, and it takes me right into my rectangle tool. I will pick this endpoint, and then I'm going to drag it over. I want to make sure, let's see the dimension. It looks like it's showing me my length first. So that's going to be 125 feet, comma, 6 feet. Enter. So I now have those two segments. Let me tap my space bar. So I get my select tool back. The next thing I'd like to do is actually draw this area right here. And I want to show you in a little bit how I'm going to get that curve in there, but I simply just want to capture this part. I'll go back to my model. And what I like to do is I always like to zoom into that area where I'm going to be drawing. Don't stay far away because it's harder. If I zoom out this far and I think I'm going to complete my drawing, it's not going to happen. I need to zoom in, zoom out, pan, orbit, so many things. Navigate this space so that I'm in charge of it. I'm manipulating it. So what I'd like to do now is draw a rectangle, but it's actually a square. But I'll still use my keyboard shortcut and I'll type R. And I'll start my rectangle from this endpoint, one click, and do not click and drag, just simply click. And then I click over here. And now I have a couple of extra lines in here that I don't need to see. First of all, let me tap my space bar. I have a line here, which I don't need anymore. And I have a line right there, which I don't need. I'm going to use my erase tool. So that's erase. And to erase, I just simply come in and I drag over it to erase. So one more time on this side, just drag over it like that to erase it. Use my space bar again. And if I click on the surface, look at this, it's all one surface so far. Back to my example. I still need to add some more information. So first of all, what we've drawn are the sidewalks. I've drawn this sidewalk and I've also drawn that sidewalk. But now what I need to do is I need to drop in what's called, or at least show rather, what's called the parkway. This is the parkway here and that's the parkway there. So I think I want to continue with that right now. And it's going to be 9 feet wide by whatever length that is. Before I do that, let me go back to my model. I think now is a good time to actually make a group out of this sidewalk, because if I put any more information next to it, and then I try to triple click, it's going to select everything. So now's a good time to triple click on my sidewalk, right click it, and make a group. There we go. And now if I place any more objects next to it or things overlap, I will at least have them separated. Okay. So here we go. I clicked off of it. That way it's no longer highlighted. What I'd like to do is I'd like to draw that parkway. And if I go back to my example, right, it's 9 feet wide by 125 feet in length. So I come back over here and I type R for rectangle, right? I'd like for that rectangle to start right at that intersection, right? If it comes down this way, but it's not going to snap. It's not going to happen here with SketchUp. So before I draw a rectangle, let me type L for line. And with the line, I simply need to draw myself a guideline from this endpoint. I click one time and I take it straight over. It's constrained to the green axis, but if you want to make sure that it will stay constrained, tap that left arrow key. And now it definitely is constrained. And now I simply hover over here and you see how it says constrained on line and it's on that intersecting line. That's what I wanted to see. So I click. And now I have that endpoint selected. I'm going to tap the space bar so that it completes that. And I'm going to do the same thing over on this side, just to give myself that guide. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You could say to yourself, hey, why didn't you leave the lines in there from the sidewalks, before as your guide and then erase them later? That would have been possible also. All right. So L again for line. From this endpoint, I wanted to constrain to red axis, so I use my right arrow key. Take it over. And as long as I find that intersection, I go ahead and click. There we go. And then space bar. And remember, these two lines are now independent of my sidewalk because I made a group out of that sidewalk. All right, I'll click off of it. I'll zoom it out. I will hold down my shift key and then use my wheel mouse to pan. And I really want to focus on this area right here. So back to my example. I needed to start at that intersection or that corner, 9 feet wide, 125 feet deep. So R for rectangle. I have that endpoint, so it's snapping to it. So I click on it one time. I take this over and I'm not clicking. I'm just looking at my dimensions and it's showing me that it's giving me that length along the red first. So I know that distance is 125 feet. And then I enter a comma. And then I type in the 9 feet and I enter. Done. On to the other side. First of all, let me tap the space bar. I want to go back to my corner lot. All right, so on the other side, it's also 9 feet. And I know that it extends further out. I will extend this in just a little bit, okay? But not yet. I just simply want to draw 9 feet by 40 feet wide. So I go back to my SketchUp model, back to R for rectangle. I start at this endpoint, click one time, and then take it over. And as I move it over, I pause right here. I look at my dimensions. It's giving me that length along the green axis, I'm sorry, red axis first. So I know that that is going to be 9 feet wide. So I type in 9 feet, comma, and 40 feet in length. Done. Tap the space bar. And then I go back to my example, right? There it is, 9 feet. Starting to look a bit like this example. So I have these two surfaces here and here. I no longer need the lines. They serve their purpose. I can delete them. But watch this. If I don't delete them and I triple click, you see that? It's picked everything. And because these two surfaces are connected by way of these two lines, all of that becomes a group. But or it could if I selected right now, but I don't want to do that. So let me click off of it. Use my erase tool, and my erase keyboard shortcut is E. So I type E, and then I simply just drag my cursor across the line here to erase it, drag my cursor across this line to erase. Tap my space bar, and now I can continue. So I will now triple click this surface. It selects the surface along with the edges. I right click, I make a group. Do the same thing over here, triple click this surface, right click it, and make a group. It's critical that you make groups. Otherwise, it gets really messy, and next thing you know it, you can't separate objects and it gets a bit frustrating. Time to add the materials, just so I can start to see this a little bit better. And by the way, I could have added a sidewalk material, but I waited just a little bit. So I will now go back to my materials. The grass dark green is still active. So my keyboard shortcut for that paint bucket is B. So I'm going to type in B. And I will click on this group. And then I will come over here and click on that group. Now I'll come back to my asphalt and concrete category. And what I'd like to select now is some asphalt. And I think I prefer this one here. I'm going to click on it. It says blacktop old. You can certainly select from any of the others. You can say asphalt new, blacktop new, blacktop old, blacktop old. What is this one? That's concrete. So no, I'll just keep it to this blacktop. And I'm actually going to use this for probably the streets and the sidewalks for myself. And I may change it later, who knows? But for now, blacktop old it is. Come back over here and I select that group. And I am on my way. Tap my space bar. and then just close this so I can take a good look and I can orbit. So what I'd like to do now is simply navigate around this space. And my next goal is to really finish this area up right here. So I'll go back to the example. And you could see that all of that is really going to be all sidewalk. And it extends out. And I showed you that it's a 15-foot radius. And if you look at this, if I add the value of 9 feet and 6 feet, that's 15 feet. So when I draw that curve right here, and let me just outline it for a second, or actually let me point to it, right? When I draw this curve right there, it's actually going to have, it's going to use that origin point as the center of the arc that I'm about to draw. So here we go. What I'd like to do then is drop in that arc. Oh, and I'm looking at something else. Looks like the sidewalk should actually continue. Oh, but it's going to get cut off. Okay, that's fine. I'll draw the arc first, and then I'll show you what we're going to do. If I want to put in that arc and I want to finalize or finish this sidewalk, if I simply start drawing the arc right now, it is going to be completely separate from this group. And I don't want to do that. So in order for me to edit that group or to continue adding to it, what I need to do is I need to double click it. So I'm going to double click the sidewalk. And you'll notice how the other objects and groups are grayed out. And then this dashed line shows up and it's a boundary and it's kind of showing me, it's saying, look, you've selected this whole group and this is the extent of that group. It's being defined by the dashed lines that show the extent along the green axis, along the red axis, and along the blue axis. So I go, okay, I'm editing the group. That's what I needed to know. So that's a good visual cue. All right, now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to orbit so that I can get a better look at the top, a little bit more of a top view of that space, of that area. And then I'm going to zoom in a lot more and then pan it. All right, so I'm really getting in there. And now I'm ready to add an arc. So the arc is right over here. This is my tool, right? If I click on it, you'll notice that I have different versions of the arc. I can do an arc, I can do a 2-point, a 3-point, and then something called a pie. I'm simply going to start with an arc right now. But before I even click on it, I want you to take a look down in the lower right-hand corner. It's reading, down there it says sides 12. In SketchUp, you have to understand that SketchUp constructs circles and arcs based on line segments. They're not actually curved objects. So I want to change that number of sides to a higher number. And all I want to do is simply change it to 24 at the very least. So I've typed in 24. And now I'm ready to begin. Now, if I look over here on the left-hand side, it says select the center point. So the first thing I need to do is select that center point. And I know that that center point is going to be over here, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Okay. So I will go ahead and click on that endpoint one time. And now I'm prompted to select the first arc point. So the first arc point is going to start right here. And I click on that. And then I take my cursor across. And as I take it across, notice how it's generating the arc for me. And when I get to this endpoint, I'm going to click. But before I click, look at look at how it's actually made up of these segments. You see that? So it's not a true vector arc, and that's okay. I will go ahead and click. It's telling me it's going to construct a quarter circle, which is correct. So good. So I click. And then you'll notice how it's expanded the extent of my group to now include the arc. And that's great. So I'm done drawing the arc, and I will now tap my space bar. Let's see. Nope, space bar is not working for whatever reason. So let's go back and I'll use my select tool. There we go. Oh, and I clicked off of it, which means it closes out of the group, and that's okay. I did that by accident. So all I have to do now is just double click to get back in there. There we go. All right. So I want to make a surface out of this. In order to do that, I have to draw two lines. So I'm going to type L. And I'm going to draw a line from this endpoint to this one. I will tap my spacebar again. Actually, the escape key works at this time. Oh, wait, did it even draw a line? Let's see. I'll check. I want to now draw a line over here from this endpoint over here. Yes. So it did draw the other line. And by drawing those two lines, it has now added to the sidewalks, and it has created a closed surface there, which is great. And now I'll go back and go back to my select tool. And now I'm going to click off of my group. And there it is, finished. You'll see that I have these two extra lines, and that's something that I do want to erase. I want to keep this drawing as clean as I can. So I'm actually going to double click to get back into that group. And you notice how my red, green, and blue axis change because I'm inside of this group. Nothing wrong with that. I just wanted to point that out, but it does make it a little bit harder to see those two lines, but that's okay. I'll type E for erase, and I'll just swipe through the line there, and then I'll swipe through this one here. And then I will tap my space bar, zoom out, and click outside of my group. And now I have that sidewalk complete up to that point. I will now continue. And I told you I'll get to the rest of this in just a little bit, but I thought it might be best to simply focus on this area right here. So since this really has a lot of the details, and I provide you all the dimensions. So what I'd like to do next is throw in that 6-inch curb. And like I said, right now, everything is flat, but we'll eventually add some thickness to this. So 6 inches by 40 inches wide, or 40 feet wide on this side, and then 6 inches by 125 feet on that side. So back I go to SketchUp, and I'm going to first put the rectangle in on this side. So I'm going to position my view, orbit, pan, zoom, all of that, just to get this in view. And now I'll draw a rectangle. So I type R. And I'd like to start at this endpoint right here. So I click on it. And then I take it across. And again, it's giving me my length first along, let's see, green axis. So that would be 40 feet wide by 6 inches. So I'm going to type in 40 feet, comma, 6 inches. Make sure you use the apostrophe, or the quotes rather, so that it's 6 inches wide and not 6 feet wide. So 40 feet, comma, 6 inches, and enter. There we go. all set there. And now I will come over to the other side. Now I'd like to focus on this length. But see, it's going to get tricky because it's such a thin curve, and I want to be able to see the whole thing. So it's going to get, here's what I'll do. I'll zoom in right here. I will click one time. And then as I bring my cursor out, I'm going to pause here, and then I'm going to zoom out. And then I'm going to hold down my shift key and pan, right? Shift and then hold down the wheel mouse. And now see if I take it out, it's a lot easier to manipulate. And at least I was able to start up close. And now the length here looks like I need to input the length first. So it's going to be 125 feet, comma, 6 inches, and enter. Tap my space bar. There we go. And then finally, I need to get this arc in there. I actually need to draw 2 arcs. So here we go. My arc keyboard shortcut. I think if I type A, it says click to set start point. I don't know if this is it. So let me actually tap my space bar and I'll go back here. Yeah, see, I don't think that's going to work. I think I need to come over here and actually click on arc. That way it gives me the center point. Yeah, center point is critical here. I'm also looking at my number of sides, and I want to use the same number of sides that I used before, and that's going to be 24. So 24 sides. I type in 24 and I can enter just to make sure it accepts that value. And it did, because it says 24 sides in arc. Okay. So now I pick this endpoint here, and I will draw my arc starting at this endpoint and take it across. Now I'm basically tracing, but remember the arc that I drew before is part of my sidewalk group, and this one is going to be part of my curb group. So I click. Now you can't see it, I can't see it, but I know it's there. And I will continue, and I'm still in my arc mode here in my tool. So I'm going back to select that as my center point. And I will now click and on this outer point. Actually, let me zoom in. All right, I'll click on this outer point here, and I'll take it across. And I'll click right there. There we go. It filled it all in, and it combined it. I'll tap my space bar. And if you want to be really particular, you will notice, right, that it looks a little strange here. And that's because the arcs are overlapping and the segments don't quite line up. And that's all right. Doesn't matter for what we're going to be doing. I'm not going to be that particular about it, but we did get our curb in there, and that's what matters the most. And now I'm going to zoom it out. I'm going to double click, actually triple click, I'm sorry. I triple click and it selects both curbs as well as the curved curb right here. I will right click that and make a group. And now that I have that group, what I'd like to do is give it a material. So I'll come over here to my materials. And this material, I would like it to be concrete. So let's see, if I click on this material that says polished concrete new, what about this one? Polished concrete old. All right, I'll go with the old version. And then I simply hover over my group and I click on it. There we go. And it now has that material applied to it. And then I'll tap my space bar. Then I'll just zoom out, pan this drawing, orbit, and just pause for a moment to check and see what I've drawn so far. Let me close the materials panel. Let's go back to my lot. Now, I've basically completed what I wanted here for this corner. The next thing I'd like to do is to actually extend the lot, or actually extend my 3D site to include additional lots. But this one right here, this is the corner lot that we're going to be using this semester. But I want to complete everything else. I want to show my 15-foot alley on the backside. And then I'm going to be populating it like I showed you before. So I would like to drop in some additional lots over here, and I'm going to show you how to do that. And then I want to extend my sidewalk and my parkway and my curb. So let me do that. And you'll notice I don't have to complete it, right? I just want to show enough so that when I place my buildings on there, it looks like I am in a neighborhood. And that's really the goal here when I do 3D modeling. I want to make sure that I feel that I'm occupying this space that is in a neighborhood. And the way it feels like a neighborhood is to place conceptual masses that look like buildings. Okay, and we'll get to that eventually. So to continue, I need to drop in additional 40-foot lots. So watch this. My next step, let me pan over here, is simply to take this site. It's already the correct size. And what I'd like to do is just make a copy of it. This is the site, the property that I'd like to make a copy of. So I've already selected it, and I'm going to type M for move. And I basically want to select it here from this origin point. So I click one time, and it looks like I'm moving it. But if I tap that control key, now I'm simply making a copy of it, and I want to place it right over here at this endpoint, just like that. I want that other property next to me to have a different material applied to it, because I don't want it to be I want the focus to remain on my property. So here's what I'll do. I'll tap my spacebar. I'll go back to my materials, and I will go back to my landscape, fencing and vegetation. And I'm going to pick this turf, this grass, and that one is showing me light green. And what I'm going to do now is use the light green and click the paint bucket on it. And it's a muted color, if you will. And if I pan over, there we go. I think if I also change this color and this one, now for me, at least, the focus is on that one site because it's different than the others. Does that make sense to you?
Makes sense.
Okay. All right. So I showed you how to make one copy, and I wanted to do just one right now so I can change the material, but I now want to show you how to make multiple copies. So let me tap my spacebar, and I'll go back to my example, and you'll see that I've got what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about another 6, right? Without getting into the details of a typical city lot that has 40-foot wide lots, let me just throw in another 5 lots over there, okay? So watch this. I'm going to pan over here. And what I'd like to do is once again, make a copy, right? First of all, let me click off of it. Okay. What I'd like to do is I'd like to take this object and make 5 additional copies of it. So here's what I will do. I click on it one time. It selects that group. I type M for move. And I come to this endpoint here. I click on it one time. It wants to move it, but as soon as I tap my control key, it will make a copy. Now, here's where I need you to be really careful and do exactly as I say. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click one time, one click. And as soon as I click it and it is at that endpoint, I am now going to use my asterisk, okay? And that would be the symbol right above the number 8 on your keyboard, which is this right here. If you look where it says distance down in the corner there, there's my asterisk, okay? I have not moved my mouse, haven't done anything. I just typed that asterisk key, which for SketchUp, it means multiply. And I want to multiply and I want to add 5 more. So I'm basically saying, make a copy times 5. And now I enter. And it has now made the additional copies. Let me go ahead and close the materials panel. Let me zoom this out. I'm still in my move command or tool, so I'm going to use the space bar. All right. And watch this. If I zoom in right here, because eventually I will end up zooming in like this, right? I don't see the end of that, and I won't because I'm going to have buildings. So that's enough. If any of you are interested in completing a typical city lot, please let me know and I'll give you more information. But this should be sufficient for what we're doing right now. Now, the next thing that needs to happen is I need to take my sidewalk and actually continue it. So watch this. I'm going to double click on my sidewalk and it is a group. Because it's a group, everything else is now grayed out. And if I come in here real close, right, and I just click on this line, is it selecting it? There it goes. It selected the line. Now I type M for move. M, and I pick this endpoint, and I just move it in this direction. And now what I have to do is zoom out, and I now need to pan. And yes, it looks like I'm putting my sidewalk in all sorts of strange places, but I'm trying to maneuver myself to that end over here. And now I click on that endpoint and I have extended the sidewalk. Tap my space bar and then click outside of the group. It'll close the group and I can now take a look at my results. I will do the same thing now with the parkway here. So I'm going to double click it. Everything else gets grayed out. I can zoom in. I can select the line. Once it turns blue, I know it's selected. I now type M for move. And I move it from this endpoint. And now I zoom out. I pan over. And then I zoom in over here. And as long as I can see it snapping to that endpoint, I click. Done. Tap my space bar to bring back my select tool. And then click outside of the group. And I have extended the parkway there. And then finally, I need to take my curb. And I really have to zoom in here because it's only 6 inches wide. So I will double click it. I'm in the group. I select the line. By clicking on it, it turns blue. So I know it is ready. I type M to use the move tool. I pick this endpoint. And then I bring it all the way out. I zoom out. And then I take it over here and I'll zoom in. And it's already showing me that it's snapping to that endpoint. So I'll go ahead and click. Spacebar. And then click outside of the group. And then zoom again to take a look at everything that I have so far. And if all this zooming is a little too much, go ahead and come back over here to this orbit tool and then find the zoom extents right there. And that shows you the full extents of your model right now. And this is a 3D model, even though everything we've done so far is 2D, right? It's a flat plane, but we will add 3D components to it. All right. Now, what I'd like to do is, let's go back to the example, right? I have a 15-foot alley, and then I have the same information on the opposite side, don't I? Let me show you how I'm going to do this. And again, if you want to follow along with me or take notes or a little bit of both and then come back and watch the recording. So let me first drop in my alley. And to put the alley in there, let me go back to my example. Let's see. Yes, the alley does continue and the curb does stop there. I just wanted to make sure of that. Okay. So now I'll come over here and orbit this way. All right. And now what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to draw a line. And that line is going to start right here at the end point of my concrete curb. I click one time. And I like to take this line across, and let me pan like this. I want to make sure it constrains to red axis, so right arrow key. And that's one way I remember it. R stands for red, R stands for right. That's it. So I tap the right arrow key. It constrains, and I want to make this 15 feet long. So 15 feet, enter. There we go. And now my space bar. All I wanted to do was to find that width. And this line has now established that for me. Now I'm going to zoom out. And then I'm going to pan. And I'm going to orbit this way. Now, can anybody guess what I'm about to do next to draw the alley? Which tool I'm going to use? So rectangle it is, R. And the only reason I drew that line is to establish an endpoint that I needed. So I can start my rectangle here at this endpoint and carry it all.
Excuse me,
Yes,
I have a question. For the line, what were the measurements again? Sorry about
that's okay. Can anybody help out?
It was 15 feet.
There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let me start again. And okay. So yes, I'm now going to draw a rectangle. So I type R and I start at this endpoint. And then I take it all the way over here to that endpoint. And that's the length of the alley. I'll tap my space bar. And I will now triple click the surface. It picks the edges. I right click and I make a group. All right, so it's very important that we make groups. All right, and then for this alley, let me give it a material. And that material will probably be this asphalt. Let's see, asphalt new, blacktop new, blacktop old. Do I even have asphalt old? No, I'm limited, and that's okay. So I'll go ahead and use, yeah, asphalt new. So I'll add that to it. Okay. And take a look around your neighborhoods and you'll see the sidewalks and your alleys, the alleys that are paved, they're either concrete or they are asphalt. And it's a different material in your sidewalks. All right. Close that. There we go. Everybody with me?
Yep.
Yep.
All right. So what I'd like to do now is take all of this information and make a copy of it to the other side. And one tool that I could use that I'm familiar with in other programs is a mirror command, but SketchUp doesn't have that. So I actually have to, first of all, make a copy of it, which means use my move tool. And then I'm going to use a new tool, and that's called the scale tool. And I'll show that to you in just a second. So here we go. First of all, making a copy. And what I'd like to do is select all of these objects. Now, if I come over here to my select tool and I click one time, you'll see that I have this option to select what's called a lasso. So I'm zoomed out, and I hope you are too on your model. I'm going to click on the lasso tool, and I basically want to just click and drag and lasso all of this. And I'm not including the alley. See, I'm staying away from the alley. Just picking all this, and I'll stop right there. And you see how I selected all of those objects? The next step is to move them. So I type M, and I'll move them, and it doesn't really matter where I pick from. In fact, I'm going to pick out here. One click, and I'm going to move them over, but I'd like to make a copy. So tap that control key, and it makes a copy. And just take it straight across like this. And it doesn't matter how far away you take it. I just want you to give yourself some distance between what you have already constructed and what we're making a copy of. So I'm going to drag it, somewhere over here like this. Okay. And now I'm going to pan over there. Let's see if my system is letting me pan. Okay. Now you notice how all of my objects are still selected. What I'd like to do right now is actually make a group out of all of these individual groups, because it's going to help me to scale them all at once. So with all of my groups selected, I right-click and I make a group. And now I click off of it. I have to give my system a second here. All right, I click off of it. And now when I go to click on it, you'll see how it picks everything. And again, that's because I just made a group out of several groups. And this is something that we do a lot of in SketchUp. When it comes time to model a building, you will see me do this as well. All right, so I know that that is a group. My next step is to use the scale tool. And the scale tool, keyboard shortcut is S, but I want to show you where it's hiding because sometimes I forget where it is. So it's underneath the move tool. So here's move, here's rotate, and here is scale. So I'm going to click on scale. And because my group of grouped objects was selected, it automatically creates a boundary here so I can scale this. And you see that there are grip points at the corners and then at the midpoints. I'm just going to zoom in right here like this for a moment. All right. And because this is a two-dimensional surface, basically, I only get one set of grip points here, or these points. When I'm working with three-dimensional objects, I'm going to get additional ones. You'll see that later. But my goal right now is to scale this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on this point one time. I click on it. And now I'm going to drag it. And as I drag it, taking it over, and watch this. As it makes it over to the other side, it's creating the mirror effect. And I want this to be the exact opposite. So if you look down in the right-hand box, it's telling me that it's scaling it about the red axis. And notice how it says minus 0.24. I'm going to type in -1 because I want the negative or the opposite. I want it to scale in the opposite direction by a factor of -1. So -1 and enter. And then I'll zoom out and you see how it has mirrored it for me. So I now that I have made a negative scale of this, right? A -1 scale, which gives me or provides me with the mirror image, I now want to bring it back and put it in place. So I'm going to simply type M, and now I can go ahead and move my one group that contains multiple groups. And I'm going to zoom in right here, real close. And I want to pick this endpoint right there, that corner. So I click on it, and now I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to take it over here. And before I click, I'm actually going to zoom in to make sure that it picks that endpoint. So I click on it. Done. And now if I zoom out, I can take a look at it. So far, so good. And yes, I now would like to change that material so that it matches the other properties that are adjacent to it. But before I do that, let me first tap my spacebar, all right? And let me click off of the objects. So what I did in order to manipulate this as one entity, right? I just clicked on it. I had to make a group out of it, and it does consist of multiple groups. But now that I have accomplished my goal, I don't need them to stay as a group. So by clicking on it one time, it highlights the group. And now if I right click, I can go ahead and explode that group. And by exploding it, it's going to break it down back to its individual groups, which is what I want. So I click explode. Done. I click off of it. And now when I click on any one of those groups that I had made earlier, for example, this parkway here, it highlights it by itself. This lot highlights it by itself. My sidewalk by itself. So I took advantage of the grouping feature to be able to manipulate multiple objects all at once, and then I exploded that group. All right, now that they're exploded, what I'd like to do is change that material. So what I'll do now is I'll go back over here to my tools and click on the paint bucket, right? But instead of painting right away, I'm going to use the eyedropper so I can sample a material. So I'll click on sample material. I'll come over here and I'll sample this site right here, this lot. I click on it one time. It borrows that material. And now I click, and notice how it changed to a bucket. And now I click here and it applies that material to it. So it absorbed using the eyedropper, the existing material, and then I was able to apply it to another object right there.